All right. I hope we're live. Hi, everybody. We are going to get this program started. Bear with me. This is my first time leading the program. Welcome to We'll Tell You What We're Reading, the monthly show where we, the staff of the Waltham Public Library, tell you what we are reading. Joining me are my colleagues, Greg Carter and Louise Goldstein. I am Liz Rior. I'm the collection development librarian here at the Waltham Public Library. And yeah, excited for today. It's a smaller group, but we've got some really great titles for you. As always, we have lots of great virtual programming here at the Waltham Public Library, and a lot of it is featured on our YouTube channel. So go ahead and smash that subscribe button or the like button, click the little bell, you know the drill, subscribe to us because you get notifications about all of our great events. We do a lot of interactive programs on Zoom as well for all ages, including our regular book clubs. Join us on Monday, August 16th, as Greg leads a discussion of Devolution by Max Brooks. It might also be pronounced de-evolution, I'm not sure, but all I know is it's about Sasquatch and I loved it. And then on Monday, August 9th, you can join us on Zoom for our regular program, Tell Us What You're Reading, which will be at 7 p.m. You'll hear from your fellow patrons and library staff as we talk about books, movies, and TV shows together, what we're currently enjoying. It's a bit more casual than this. It's fun, and you'll get some great ideas of things to check out. For all Waltham Public Library programs, please visit our website for more information and to get Zoom links when applicable. And as always, we could not do this without the friends of the Waltham Public Library. Thanks to them and their support of a professional Zoom account, which allows for YouTube streaming, we can host programs like this on YouTube. They have also made it possible for our children's room to buy so many of the supplies for the takeaway crafts and programs that folks in the city have really enjoyed. So please consider joining the Friends of the Waltham Public Library. They are truly wonderful. We're very grateful for their support. So now I'm going to turn it over to my coworker, Greg. So Greg, take it away.
Thank you so much, Liz, and thank you for that ringing endorsement. Really appreciate it. So I will start with my books. Bear with me, folks, while I get this all sorted out. And let's get this show on the road. All right, so I've read 3 books in July. The first of which is Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia. This is a bit of a cheat for 2 reasons. One, I read this last year, and I'm pretty sure I talked about it during one of our Tell You What You're Reading books. And 2, this was the science fiction fantasy book club pick for this month. But you know what? I still have to talk about it because quite honestly, I love this book. I loved it. I liked it when the first time I read it, but after reading it a second time, I really just come to appreciate it even more. For those of you who don't know what it's about, Mexican Gothic is, well, the title really says it all. It's a Gothic horror story that takes place in Mexico. But in more detail, it focuses on a woman by the name of Naomi. Naomi is a socialite from a very wealthy family who's growing up in 1950s Mexico City. And she's having a pretty awesome time with her life, but she gets a letter from her cousin, Catalina, and she has just married into like a fairly well-to-do British family that lives in this mansion called High Place. And the message has been, it doesn't really make sense. It sounds like the ramblings of a very troubled person, which doesn't usually describe her cousin very well. And it's just begging for her to come save her. Naomi's father wants to obviously have her go see what's going on because he doesn't really want to cause a scandal and he generally wants to see that his niece is okay. But also, since this is the 1950s Mexico, her husband Virgil really has the ultimate say in what can and can't be done, because unfortunately, women's rights were not much of a thing back then. So anyway, she goes there and she encounters Virgil and his whole family, the Doyles, and there is something going on there. Virgil is of a polite but very kind of off-putting Englishman, and there's just a lot not going on. No, seems to be something like hidden under the surface. High Place is definitely a once glorified place that's kind of seeing seen better days, and it's just, there seems to be a lot of whispering coming from the hallways, especially at night. So Naomi's trying to figure out the details of why Catalina left her this message, especially now that Catalina's saying, oh, she's fine, completely well. But it's just like, what do the Doyles, are there any nefarious purposes or secrets that the Doyles are hiding? What are they? Why does she hear things clawing at the walls at night? And what exactly is the deal with the history of the graveyard and the kind of like golden visions of a lady that she keeps seeing? It's very, very well done. And I don't want to say any more because this is definitely one of those stories where the less you know going into it, the more of a kick you're going to get later. But if you love like a good old Gothic horror story that focuses on themes of like the sins of colonialism, exploitation of indigenous people, and a really, really tough as nails female protagonist, I would recommend it. 5 out of 5 stars. I don't really rate this, but sure. Please read it. I think you'll really like it. Unless you don't like horror, in which case maybe you shouldn't. But in any case, speaking of horror, my next book is Stephen King's Everything's Eventual. Stephen King and I have an interesting relationship. He is one of the few authors that I simultaneously love and cannot stand at the same time. I think most of the times when it comes to an author, I know I either like them or I don't. King has, when it comes to his stories, I either, more often than not, I can't stand him or I absolutely adore him. There's not really much of a middle ground when it comes to this. So his collection of stories here are like reading a collection of short stories is really kind of hard to grade because there's some stories you're going to like, there's some stories that are going to be like meh, and then there's some stories that are going to be like, well, you might not like at all. And I don't really have, and this isn't really anything of an exception to me, but the stories that I do like in this book, I absolutely like enjoy and can almost quote word for word. So the two that come to mind in this one is The Man in the Black Suit, which is a story about a nearly 100-year-old man and retelling his experiences in turn of the century Maine when he was a little boy, and how he just one day happened to encounter the devil, like the literal devil on like the road while he was fishing, and how he had to like escape with his life. The second one is a short story called 1408, which was the basis of a movie which starred John Cusack and Samuel L. Jackson. I like those actors a lot, but I wouldn't recommend the movie. It's not really that good. However, the short story it's based off of is maybe my favorite Stephen King short story ever. Long story short, it's about a man by the name of Enslin. He is a kind of like a horror or ghost hunter in a sense. He's kind of more of a debunker. He has like 3 books called 13 Nights in 13 Haunted Houses, 13 Nights in 13 Haunted Graveyards, and Castles, and so forth. But his newest book is going to be called 13 Nights in 13 Haunted Hotels. And there's this hotel that in itself isn't haunted, but the room 1408 is, and he wants to go up there and he wants to like spend a night there. And the hotel manager is trying to do everything in his power not to like go up there. And one of the haunting like sentences that Stephen King has in this is that the hotel manager's like, look, you're a skeptic. Ghosts don't really appear to people who are skeptics, so you're not really going to see a ghost up there. And he goes, well, then why are you worried? I shouldn't be scared. He's like, I shouldn't be worried about anything up there. And he goes, but you should be, because there are no ghosts in room 1408, but there's something in there, and it's not very pleasant. And it's just what waits for him is a very surreal, terrifying ride. I would say, I don't know if I'd recommend buying this book, because there's some stories in there that are kind of like meh, but thankfully you don't have to buy it, because you could just rent it from your local public library and choose it and read those stories. So yeah, I'd say give it a read. Finally, last but definitely not least, is Shark Trouble by Peter Benchley. And I've already shared reading this story, and like earlier this month, and telling in the tell us what you're reading, but I like this so much that I had to go back to it. For those of you who don't know, and I know that Liz and Louise definitely know this about me, I'm kind of a shark nerd. I love sharks. Like Shark Week's one of my favorite like TV things of the year, and I'm a huge fan of Jaws. Funny enough, though, I'm not actually a diehard fan of the book. I didn't really think it was that good, but Peter Benchley's nonfiction writing, which here is Shark Trouble, is really spot on, and I really enjoyed it. It's pretty much him trying to like atone for a lot of his writings of like the fantasy of Jaws, and getting to the roots of like why sharks are very important and they should be like preserved from an environmental conservative standpoint. And how to best protect yourselves against them, because while they're not monsters, they're still wild animals. There is a passage in here where he goes, if somebody was to go to like, say, the jungle, and nothing but a bathing suit and suntan lotion and maybe a 6-pack of soda, you'd call that you wouldn't think that person's very like well prepared, because honestly, it's I mean, it's a wild habitat full of potentially dangerous creatures, and you have to prepare for that. But people do that for the ocean, even though the ocean is honestly one of the most, one of the largest and potentially hazardous places for human beings to enter. Not because they're things necessarily want to eat us, but it's just, it's something that is, it's not a civilized part of the world. It's like a natural habitat, and you have to be prepared and cautious about these things. I think it's just, you're not gonna, if you're looking for like a horror story, you're not gonna find it here, because it's just really scientifically factual, though Peter Benchley does a good job in like raising stakes and stuff like that. But I cannot, yeah, I'd really like it. Give it a shot. I found it very enjoyable. And that is it. And I'm embarrassed. I am trying to remember who went next. I believe it's Liz, correct? No, it's Louise. I am going to give it over to Louise. Was doing good. Sorry, folks. And that's that.
You're doing great, Greg. We love you. You're doing great.
Oh, go ahead, Louise.
Oh, Greg, I think your screen is still being shared.
Good.
Okay, Liz, Louise, we both begin with L. We both have curly hair. Actually, we all have curly hair today. Okay. Hello, everybody. I wanted to start with this book called Migrants. It's by Issa Watanabe, who was born in Peru. I believe this was translated from Spanish. This is a children's book, and it is a book without words. And It is such a beautiful book. I feel that it is a good book for adults as well as children. The pictures are gorgeous, and Issa Watanabe, like I said, she's from Peru, but at one point in her life, she moved to Majorca, and she actually had a migrant named Budle, and I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing that correctly, who lived with her for a while, and he was a migrant, and he described his story to her. And then she read also about some of the Syrian children who were migrants, and as one would, feels for the plight of the migrants. And so by using animals to portray the story, animals are kind of universal, and we all can see how cute they are, and we can sort of look past some of our blinders like race and nationality, and just see animals and sort of see their expressions. And here they are, migrant animals. These are some of the illustrations from the book. These are some of the migrants cooking some of the food that they need. And there is death in this book. Death is there because some of the migrants will die, especially on the crossing over the water. And you can see a blue ibis here, and ibises are symbolic of the passage between life and death. And you can see that death is kind of portrayed beautifully and is sort of a sympathetic character as they lose some of their fellows on the difficult journey. A beautiful book. I can't recommend it enough. I just want to say also on YouTube, you can find a little film that was made out of the book that shows some of the beings, and they kind of animate them, and it's lovely. The book is unbelievably beautiful. I recommend this to anybody. The next book I want to talk about is called Blind Sight by Peter Watts, and this book is considered hard science fiction. I actually had to look up what hard science fiction is. I'm sure many of you already know, but I didn't. And hard science fiction is when there's a concern with the author for scientific accuracy and logic. And Peter Watts definitely did his homework when he wrote this book. This is a fabulous book for vampire lovers. No worries, we have a vampire. The posit of this book is that vampires are actually real. They're not mythical creatures, they're real creatures. But what happens is once they've sort of eaten their fill of humans, they go dormant for a period of time, and then they come back when there's plenty of food to be had, type of thing. And this book has sort of the interest in technology that can be kind of great to read about. Our main character, the narrator, Siri Keaton, he almost seems like he might be a very bright autistic person, but really in the book, he had an hemispherectomy in his brain, so that part of his brain functions as a brain would, but the other part, there's a lot of technical gadgets and things in there. And so he has a lot of technical knowledge, not so attuned to his own emotions anymore, but he can read other people and sort of help them to get along, because he can kind of see where they're coming from. So he's one of the people who are on this flight because they found signs of alien life. And they have Major Amanda Bates, and they have a woman called the Gang with Susan James as the head, and a woman named Michelle. These are like, in the theory of multiple personalities, people have alters, right? These are kind of like that. All of these beings are living with Susan James in her body. Michelle, who is having a romance with one of the crew members, Sasha, and a male named Crunch, who comes out very rarely. So all of these different characters will come up at different times with the gang. And the chief of the group is our vampire, and he's kind of a scary, very scary character. And with Isaac Spindle, who's the one who's having the sort of affair with Michelle, who's one of the gang. Well, I'm not going to tell you what happens to him, but something happens to him that's very interesting. And by the way, in this universe, on Earth, they have created this place called heaven, which is where part of your brain is sort of kept alive and you're in this kind of virtual reality that is whatever you want it to be. And that's what Siri Keaton's mother is doing. She's in, quote, heaven. And she was kind of an awful mother to Siri, very invasive and very critical of his father, who was away a lot doing his job. And so you have sort of interesting kind of human aspects, but then you've got these sort of not human aspects. And Peter Watts seems to be interested in consciousness, science, and also that thing that we call I, and whether that is so necessary for achievement. And it's a really, really interesting book. The ship itself is filled with artificial intelligence, and they come across the aliens, and the name of where they are is called Rorschach, almost like a Rorschach test. And the aliens are incredibly smart, and they're kind of dangerous, and it's awesome. I'm probably not even doing this book justice. It's a really good book. It is pretty scientific. I sometimes was having trouble understanding and had to reread some passages, but I loved it. I loved the world building. I loved the aliens, and there are very interesting aspects. It was the very unusual crew he had. I thought it was a phenomenal book. Also, by the way, just to let you know, of course you can get the book through us, but Peter Watts actually has the full book available on his website, his Creative Commons website, for license for the book, because he didn't feel he got the proper publicity for this book. And it's a great book. This book we read in one of our book groups, and I wanted to touch upon it because it was such a wonderful book. This is Liberty by Caitlin Greenidge. I do want to say also, you can always get this book on Hoopla. You can get it in book form through us, but you can get it on our Hoopla digital platform, and you never have to wait for it on Hoopla. So if you want to read it, you can absolutely do that. You could do it today with Hoopla. We have a lot of copies in the library as well. This is an incredible book. It is sort of taking place during Reconstruction, like in the 1860s, and the main character is based on one of the third, I think it's the third Black woman in America to become a doctor. And her name was Susan Smith McKinney. And she was the third African-American woman to earn a medical degree in this country. After the Civil War, McKinney Stewart opened her own practice in Brooklyn and founded the Homeopathic Hospital and Women's Dispensary. And so our fictional character, Kathy Sampson, is also a doctor. Interestingly, she's very light-skinned. And in the book, she applied to medical school, and they were angry with her when they found out she was African-American. And she said, well, you never asked. And so colorism is one of the aspects of this book. Kathy Sampson's daughter, Liberty, is dark-skinned. And as a dark-skinned person, she experiences more prejudice, basically, than her mother does. And her mother really wants Liberty to go into the sciences like she did and maybe work with her as a doctor. But Liberty really has a different calling. She likes music, she likes words, she likes poetry. You can tell even by the way she speaks in the novel. She has a kind of a poetic, beautiful, lyrical voice. And she goes off to school, but she's really not interested in the subjects. It's her doing this sort of pre-medical course and a bunch of boys. And she ends up following these two lovely young women who sing, and she just loves their music. Interestingly, these two lovely young women are also gay and are involved with each other, although they have to keep it on the down low, of course. Anyway, and Liberty and her mother, before she goes off to school, they are free Blacks, and they are helping to rescue Blacks who were formerly slaves. And at the very beginning of the book, we have a gentleman coming in a coffin, and they get him out, and he's pretty traumatized by his time being a slave, and his name is Ben. And as time goes on, he ends up getting called Ben Daisy by all of the townspeople because he's always talking about Daisy, who was his love. And another thing this book is kind of examining is the trauma of having been a slave and what that's like to be, quote, free, but to have all this trauma from what came before. It also is exploring a very strong mother-daughter relationship. I think it's also kind of a feminist book because we have strong women characters. And Liberty ends up getting married to her mother's assistant, Emmanuel, and going to Haiti. And her time in Haiti, it's almost like you're reading a Gothic novel like Rebecca or Jane Eyre. We have a mad woman, we have this perverted father of her husband, which she didn't tell her about. He's very perverted. It's a fantastic book, beautifully written, raises a lot of questions for the reader to think about. And it's just a good read too. It's just a darn good read. I couldn't put it down. And I wanted to close with this book, which is the very best of the best, which is very high praise, is it not? The editor is Gardner Dozois, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. But oftentimes if I'm reading a collection, an anthology of stories, I might like one, kind of like what Greg was talking about with his Stephen King anthology. I might like one story and the next one might be, like he said, meh. Not with this book. I've read about 6 of the stories in this book so far. Nothing was meh. They were all superb. And apparently Gardner Dozois has received awards for his editing. He's a very top-notch editor. And I'm reading stories about life on Mars. I'm reading stories about a woman in future India who's declared, she's actually a girl, who's declared to be a goddess, but then things go wrong because she bleeds. And once you bleed from your feet or anywhere else, you have to stop being a goddess. And then she ends up, they're trying to arrange her marriage. And then she ends up married to a man who looks like a boy. It's so absurd. And then she has to leave that. And then she has to take on another iteration. And every story that I read in this book is superb. And it feels like a piece of art, like a fine piece of china or something. The world building is beautiful. I just had to include this because it's really superb. It lives up to the title. Also, just so you know, you can get the book through us, but on Hoopla, they do have an audiobook of this available that you can get anytime. And with that, I'm going to hand off to my esteemed colleague, Liz.
Thank you, Louise. Thank you, Greg, for both of those lovely groupings of selections of books. I really like Caitlin Greenidge. I haven't read her current book, but her previous book, We Love You, Charlie Freeman, is chef's kiss. It's outstanding. Alrighty, so let me share my screen. All right, so the first book that I'm going to talk about today is Leaving Isn't the Hardest Thing by Lauren Ho, I think is how she pronounces her last name. So Lauren Ho is many things, has had many jobs. She's a bouncer at a club, a writer, she's an Air Force veteran, a lesbian, a former cable repair person, and a survivor of the infamous Children of God cult founded by David Berg in 1968. She was raised in the cult from birth until about the age of 6, and then her family returned to the cult when she was in her early teens, I believe. Maybe she had a small break in the middle of her childhood. Anyways, she's been through hell, and I loved this series of autobiographical essays. They explore, what is your identity when you are raised in a cult? If you are, when you move around a lot, what is your home? They're really beautiful essays. She's experienced abuse, bigotry, assault, prison, homelessness, but her wit and spark just shine through in this series of essays, and I cannot recommend it enough. The last essay in particular is just heartbreaking and beautiful, and I feel like I need to read it once a week for the rest of my life. It's just so good. My second book I'm going to talk about is Islands of Abandonment by Cal Flynn, Nature Rebounding in the Post-Human Landscape. So when I was growing up, there was this large abandoned factory not too far from my parents' house, like a 25-minute drive. And we would pass it whenever we had to go to the grocery store. And as a kid, every time we went by it, I would tell myself, one day when I'm old, like 15, I'm going to go in that abandoned factory and I'm going to explore it. But that never happened because it got torn down and a nicer, newer grocery store was built in its place. But just since that time, I've been kind of fascinated by abandoned structures, abandoned highways, just anything that's sort of human, that has all this effort put into it and then is just left. So there's just something to me that's really beautiful about nature reclaiming human spaces. So I don't advocate trespassing or breaking any laws. We here at the Waltham Public Library do not want you breaking into any abandoned buildings for a variety of reasons. But if you are interested in learning more about what happens to abandoned spaces, this book is great for you. It's a great stand-in. Flynn takes you to locations all around the world, from a small island off the Scottish coast to sort of the granddaddy of all abandoned places, the Chernobyl exclusion zone. Flynn gives a great in-depth description of not only how nature takes over abandoned spaces, but sort of the history of the space, the social ramifications of the space being abandoned. Really, my only complaint about this book is that there are no pictures, and it would be just so wonderful to be able to see, what these locations look like, both when they were in use and in their current state. But I can understand Flynn wanting to not encourage folks to actually go to these locations because, one, they're places where nature is healing, and two, abandoned buildings can have a lot of structural dangers to them. But really love it, truly fascinating stuff. My last book is weird, as you might be able to tell by the German short-haired pointer on the cover wearing a brassiere, sitting next to a chicken and a thing of pencils and a duck wearing sunglasses. And I should state, this book is not available in our network, unfortunately. But if you decide, after listening to me talk about it, that you would like to read it, we are happy to try to get it for you through interlibrary loan. Just give us a call, and we'll do our best to get it for you. So this weird and wonderful little 1982 book is a bizarre satire of an L.L. Bean catalog. I grew up in New England, born and raised. I own a pair of duck boots. I have lots of socks from LL Bean that are very thick and warm. My dad pretty much only buys clothing from LL Bean, so I am very familiar with the LL Bean catalog. And it was always very exciting when it would arrive at our house because we'd go through and look at all the plaid. So this book is as a satire of that. It has satirical listings of helpful outdoors clothing and equipment, such as a gumshoe made out of pre-softened chewing gum for $43.75. For your skiing vacations, a hibachi grill on skis, so you can grill while you are going down the mountain for $160.25. The self-dentistry helmet, so that you can make sure that while you're out and about exploring the outdoors, your teeth are nice and healthy. It's $36.75. An inflatable cheese slice Still not entirely sure what the purpose of that was. And then, of course, you can buy through this catalog the entire state of Maine for $76 million plus $3.20 postage. They only allow one order per customer, so make sure you order it quickly. Albeit, again, this is from 1982. I was born in 86, so they might be sold out. If you grew up in New England, if you like weird, humorous satire books, if you're an LL Bean fan, if you like crazy, weird inventions that are silly or completely nonsensical, this is a really fun book. It's not super long. The pictures are great. It's just a great, quirky little find. And remember, we can try to get it for you through interlibrary loan. So those are my titles. And now we're going to open it up to our discussion of what movies and TV shows we have been reading, or not reading. What movies have you read? Movies and TV shows we have been watching recently. So Greg or Louise, do either of you have anything you'd like to share with our viewers? If not, I do.
Yeah, I watched one thing that was recently that kind of piqued my interest. So it's kind of weird. There was a movie that I watched over this weekend called Werewolves Within. It's very strange how it got made, because it is a movie that's based off of a video game, which is in turn based off of the kind of social game Werewolf. For those who don't know about it, long story short, in the game Werewolf, two people are chosen to be like the werewolf, and everybody else is like the townsfolk. And through like a game of guessing and deduction, you try to determine who is like the werewolf and who isn't. And there's a lot of accusations and things around that. For the younger generation, it's very similar to the video game Among Us. Yeah, it's definitely it's a horror comedy, definitely more comedy than horror. It takes place in this Vermont town where there's a local sheriff, and he's trying to get to know all these quirky townsfolk. And all of a sudden a storm hits, and somebody's like ripped apart the generators, almost as if the generators have been ripped apart with something with claws and opposable thumbs. People start to get picked off one by one, and everybody's like, there's a werewolf, but who's the werewolf? And the it's kind of like if somebody decided to make John Carpenter's The Thing a comedy. So I thought it was fun. If you're like a diehard horror fan, you might be a little disappointed because it's not going to be something like that intense, but I don't know. It was a fun viewing. I'd give it a watch. You can like rent it. I think it's like out in select movie theaters. I streamed it from Amazon. So yeah, it was fun. It was cute. And that's what I got.
Thank you. Louise, do you have anything you'd like to know? That's fine, because I've got two things that I can talk about. So recently I saw this amazing documentary called The Sparks Brothers. And this is a documentary about the the band Sparks, which is basically two brothers, Ron and Russell Mael, I believe is how they say their last name. And then they have musicians as well. They got their start in the very early 70s, and they had some success in Europe, but never really caught on in sort of a large scale way in the United States or across the world. This documentary is directed by Edgar Wright, and it is so good because these two brothers are very weird and amazing people who make really good music that is just whatever they want to make. I know I almost can't even describe their music because the style changes so much. It's very introspective. They made one of the first fully synthesized albums in the late 70s. They've had a huge influence, and yet very few people actually know who they are. They also just released a movie at Cannes called Annette, which won Best Soundtrack, which of course they wrote. And the director won Best Director, I believe. So I'm very excited to see their film Annette. And you should check out the band Sparks. They have 25 albums, I believe, and they will be touring next year. So just a little plug to Sparks. They're great. And the documentary, The Sparks Brothers, is amazing. It's almost, I think it's like 2 hours long, and it doesn't even feel like it. It's so good. Coming out of it, I was like, I need to follow my creativity no matter what people say. Like, just do what you want to do for your art, for your own self-expression. It was outstanding. And on the other end of the spectrum, I watched the Resident Evil TV show on Netflix, which is 4 computer-generated CGI episodes, and the animation is great. The plot is like a fishnet. It's just like nothing but holes. Resident Evil is a series of video games from Capcom that's about killing mutants and zombies and whatnot. And it's sort of a big take on, the industrialization of biotechnology and using science for war. And I'm making it sound a lot more intelligent than it actually is, I think. But the animation was great. I recommend it for the animation, but don't go in expecting really serious plot, because it's a little, things just happen. I don't know, but
Sounds about right.
yeah, I mean, the video games are great. They're very scary.
Oh yeah.
There's lots of goo and blood and tentacles and teeth. Not the best for kids, probably.
Nope.
But with that, Greg, any other titles you'd like to share?
It's one of those things where I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but as soon
That's
as this
okay.
closes, it's going to be like, oh no, but there'll be always a next time.
That's good. All right. Well, thank you so much, Greg and Louise. And thank you to all of our viewers for tuning in today. You'll be able to watch this again. As it will be saved to our YouTube channel, and you can watch previous editions of this program. Don't forget to check out our future events to like and subscribe to our channel. And a final massive thank you to the Friends of the Waltham Public Library for providing access to this page Zoom account. We really, really appreciate it. So I hope everyone has a great day. Stay cool, and we'll see you at the library.